Good evening. I'm Father Paul Hamilton, and we are at the Church of the Holy Faith in Dunellen, Florida. I know we have friends around the world who watch us on YouTube, and this is our Holy Week conversation. We have had a long, wonderful season of Lent, and we are now in the beginning of Holy Week, and I've gathered some of the main leaders of our congregation just to kind of pause and reflect on two particular issues that we as people are facing right now, and we as Christians. We're all alive during a particular era which has its own particular challenges, and certainly it seems to me of late among the challenges has been the COVID epidemic and also war. So I've asked these distinguished folks from this congregation, the senior warden, Donna Hernandez, who has been a school teacher for over 30 years and a gifted leader here in our church, Adela Anderson, who is the parish administrator. She was a long-time fitness expert in this area, and she now serves in that capacity as parish administrator, which is a big responsibility. And Raymond Mikes, who has many hats here at this church. He is the junior warden. He runs our weekly Bible class, which is now being live streamed, and he is a candidate through the Diocese of Central Florida to become a licensed preacher. And there was one other thing. I forget the other category. There was another category for you.
That's enough.
Yeah. So I just wanted us to, take a few moments to reflect. We are so busy, and Lent has been so busy, and life is so busy. And to just pause, because we've been grappling with COVID now for 2 years. I just read today that presently, although the numbers are all going down, there's 31,000 new cases of COVID every day right now in the United States. And so I was going to ask these folks to reflect on their thoughts and feelings about what we have been and what we are going through in terms of this pandemic. Anybody want to start?
Well, I'd like to just say that yes, COVID was bad. COVID has been bad and everything. But I think there's an upside in the fact that it has brought people closer together. I think definitely families, because they've had to stay home and be together. And also I think as church people, as leaders in the church, we have become more aware of what our parishioners need and their needs and how we can care for them during this pandemic. So there's an upside to it, but also we know what the downside is. So. Yeah.
Well, I feel that COVID has increased the trend toward internet evangelism, and that is a wonderful thing that has happened. A lot of people could not leave home or have been isolated from everybody else. And the internet has opened up churches to the homes of the people. So many people have now, they still have problems, and now they have a way to hear the Bible. And also, they have searched a lot of apps on the phone, and a lot of younger people are reaching to read the Bible and reaching to Jesus. And this is one of the good things that we have now more ways to communicate and give the message of our Lord and our Christ.
I was discussing some of this with the Bible class this morning, and it comes down to what we missed in the COVID. When you couldn't actually visit people, you may have had to visit them through a screen, through a window, and we've lost the sense of touch to each other. Waving peace sign in church didn't really feel that powerful. Now we're seeing coming back, people are hugging act of sign of peace, which is what it should be. A full body hug, a relationship, a touching, a sense of brotherhood that we were kind of put aside because of COVID, because we couldn't gather in groups, because we couldn't touch one another, not even shake hands. We're doing the elbow stuff. And now we're seeing the need that we have to be with others and just give a hug.
Hugs are very important.
Yeah.
I'm a hugger. But I agree that it seems like it's strong. We're stronger now because of it.
Yeah.
We're becoming stronger as human beings because we have had this kind of what I want to call a lack of, but now we're able to do this again, hopefully for a while, and do it genuinely. You know, people are saying, "I love you," and meaning it. A lot of times it was just, "I love you," okay, and go on. But now it's a real meaning. You feel a little bit more genuine, I think, in the hugs. And
yeah, and staying together, it has been so good, especially now that we are open to brunches and little things at church. You have seen the camaraderie of everybody and the smile that we are able to do that again. And that's very important.
I think also that we need to look at the fact that our faith has brought us to this point. Because of our strong faith, we are able to do this again. A lot of people lost their faith during this period.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, too, in terms of the younger generations, though, there are several generations who are rather alienated from church. And I just think as culture, we've become all spoiled thinking that any illness or disease is going to be taken care of. You just take a pill and everything is fine. Whereas throughout human history, there have been plagues. This is not the first one. This is the 1000th one, you know? And every era has had them, and people have dealt with them in different ways. And I think that younger people, because this is the first time they've ever had this experience, to realize how vulnerable it is to be a human being. And it's not necessarily pleasant, but I came across the Episcopal Church, the prayer book, which is central to our worship. The first prayer book in 1662 had the following prayer about plagues, and I think the tone of it is quite revealing. O Almighty God, who in thy wrath did send a plague upon thine own people in the wilderness for their obstinate rebellion against Moses and Aaron, and also in the time of King David, did slay with the plague of pestilence 70,010,000, etc., etc., and the angel of death destroyed people, and on and on. Now that was in our prayer book. And it just says to me about the mindset of the time. People saw illness and disease as if it were a punishment from the Creator. Whereas, hopefully, we've evolved enough to know that it's part of creation, it's part of living and dying in cycles. And the flip side of that is, it seems to me, the tremendous miracles through modern medicine. That so quickly we developed shots for this and boosters, and it now it's saved countless lives, just miraculously, that kind of discovery. So to me, I think, okay, we're still in this pandemic, and then now predicting that there'll be more in the future. But as a human being, you can influence your times, and you can do for good. And I think we at this church have found ways to minister to each other, to hold each other up, to care for each other, to bring food to each other, all of these things, to make contributions toward the cause, if you will. All of that is small human efforts to do good, and it does make a big difference.
Well, I also think that there's sometimes people that really have gotten upset with God because there's deaths in their families. There have been a lot of difficulties and crises in families. But what we have to realize that from all of this, if people are upset, we need to reach to them, because if they are not able to spiritually talk to God, they need to talk with their priest, or they need to talk to a good friend that can understand them and that they can lead them to the good path, and just forgive what's going on, because pandemic hits everybody. It doesn't have a way, but it hits anybody. You can be a child, you can be an adult, you can be anything, and so we just have to be thankful that God is with us and that we could have somebody to talk and help us with the situation.
And I think, too, this is pointed out that America is such a gifted country, that God has blessed this country in such extraordinary ways, but therefore we're called to a different kind of action and responsibility, like sharing vaccines with the rest of the world. There still is an inequity in parts of Africa and elsewhere where we can do even more.
We are just so blessed in this country. And we hear people complaining they're going to the grocery store and they don't have this on the shelf and this on the shelf. There are people who've lived this way for years in other countries. And here we are, we're complaining. We complain because we couldn't get toilet paper, for God's sakes. You know, these are the things that I think has broadened our understanding of the whole thing. It's, you know, we're very blessed, and we need to think about those people who aren't. And in countries like, well, or Africa, where they're going through all this, they're going through there. Think of those women who are carrying water on their head. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't have to do that, but we're still here. We went through a pandemic. We lost a lot of people, but we're still here, and we're still able to do things.
And we have the communication that you can watch TV, you can hear the news, what to do. We are a civilized nation. There's other places where they live in rural areas that don't even know that the pandemic is going on. And so we are very fortunate in many ways, just living here in the United States.
Part of the miracle, like you mentioned, Bishop Augustine, who doesn't have running water where he's living, and so the women are carrying water on their heads, but it's contaminated water from the river.
Right.
But there are pills to make it safe to use. And so he's able to take, again, another modern miracle to make it safe to use. Well, now, the other topic I was thinking about is war. And, you know, we really are in the midst of a war right now, and we can't deny that. And I wonder what your thoughts and feelings are about that, particularly now that we're in Holy Week and Good Friday's coming up and so on. Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, I'm probably the only one sitting here that remembers in the 30s. I wasn't that old, but I remember the rationing of war, of what war did, what World War II did for us. The rationing, the pulling the dark shades down. I lived in Colorado, and even then, we had to darken our house at night for fear that there would be light shining through. I had two brothers and a brother-in-law who went off to war, not knowing whether they were coming back. My experience with war is fear, a great fear. But things happened, and they came back, and things leveled out, and before long we were back moving normal. But I think that war brings on so many different emotions for people. Anger, fear. I think this is where we need to call on our good Lord and God to take care of us.
And I think there's a difference, all these horrible things in Ukraine right now, if you watch the older folks, how they're coping as opposed to the children who are so stunned and traumatized by this experience. The older folks have been there before. and they know something about pain and suffering and injustice, and yet there's a resilience and they press on.
Yeah. My mother, was in Czechoslovakia during the Second World War, and I still can remember, since I was a little girl, she telling me all the stories, how difficult it was, because they had to go and every day go to the plaza to see if their husbands, their sons are still alive. And also, they would pray. They would go inside in the inside, what do you call it?
The
On
basement?
the basements or on the bomb shelters, and they would get together as a family and pray. And they would pray every single day for the life of their loved ones. And they could hear the bombs going all over, and my mother went through all of that. And I know humans are doing really terrible things right now, and so that's why we have to really turn to God and to Christ.
I'm amazed that we have this media covering it as the bombs fall.
Indeed.
And we're watching this inhumanity to man and wondering, where is it coming from? Why are these soldiers even doing this? Because they're being told to. And we had a lot of anti-war in Vietnam. I marched against the war in D.C. a couple of times. And it's amazing that over there the freedom isn't there to oppose some inhumanity. And yet we're all capable of that. I go back to the talk I gave on the sinister. Your left hand is sinister, is evil. That's what left means. And in our left hand and our right hand, you could say good and evil, and we're all capable of that. And we make a choice to be right or at least moral in our decisions, but in other countries, they're not allowed to make that choice. And I always see this Russian leader, and I look at his picture, and I say, that man needs a hug. I mean, he's just got it wrong. You know, in this day and age, you can just bomb the hell out of people, and they're going to submit. Well, he's finding out that doesn't happen anymore.
But I also feel that we have a war going, persecution of Christians all over the world, in Sudan, in Africa, in different countries all over the world. And so that's one of the things we have to get united and pray for that, for unity and love and with Christ.
Well, that's a very good point. But again, Christianity has been opposed from the beginning. And I think that's, you could say that this is part of evil's drive, you know, to do so. I saw on the TV this, somebody went into a bombed out house, and apparently a Russian soldier had written on the blackboard, it was a school, and he'd written on the blackboard, it's, we don't want this war either. So even the soldier was just being forced to do this. But again, I think the younger generations, you know, you experienced it, so you have a wisdom about it, if you will.
Yeah, my experience, though, was different because we didn't know what was going on. Right. We only heard 5 or 6 weeks later that something would come through. We didn't have the TV. We didn't have the radio. We didn't have that. We weren't in the middle of it like we are now.
Yeah, we really are.
I mean, instantaneous. You know what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's scary is that they can destroy people with a touch of a button. Bombs drop, and they don't know where the bombs go, and yet we're seeing them coming down. It's like, well, where's the divide there of a person pushing the button wherever and those receiving the end of it who didn't cause any evil?
It's impersonal.
Yeah, it's impersonal, but it's also so much punishment going on. And like you think
Where's
of the
God?
Well, the book of Job answers that question. Because where's the Creator? Who set the ocean where it is? I mean, he goes beyond us, our human nature.
Right.
And that's what we have to realize, is our human nature is pretty awful. And when it's let loose, like in certain countries, not just over there.
Oh, I know.
We've had
Everywhere.
wars going on. The average is 7 at any time in this world. It's just human nature that wants to take and destroy that ego. And like our favorite bishop says, the power of love is the combat has to be done with that power. And it's not against hate, it's against ego. It's against those who think they're better than love.
Well, I also found it interesting that some of the research says that after war, a lot of people have turned to religion. Like after World War II, that whole generation became deeply religious. Like in England, after the bombing of London, you know, churches, people flocked to churches, and the whole generation stayed devoted to church. That's not necessarily happening today. But again, I think our younger generations have never been exposed to this. It's one thing to watch violent games on TV. It's another to see where these are people. And I mean, I think of some of the counter to evil. You know, Christ's resurrection was the ultimate counter to evil. And it is human nature. But there's also the spark of divinity in us so that we can also take actions. For example, after World War I, which was, they said, the worst, most, difficult, the most horrible war ever, after World War I, what came about? The League of Nations. You know, I mean, that people decided it was so horrific, we've got to find a way to connect with each other. After World War II, the building on that became the United Nations.
Civil War? Civil War in the United States.
Way back to the beginning, the Civil War started all
Awful.
that, too.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a surge of unity,
Yes.
even though the country was divided.
And I would like to think, look what we did here last Sunday. This little church off on the beaten track, off the side track and so on, we spontaneously said, let's have a second collection for Ukraine. And our little gang gave $200 right on the spot. So, you know, every one of us can do some action for good, even if it's praying, even if it's just prayer, because that's power. Or there's so many illustrations, Doctors Without Borders,
Exactly.
for example, you know, or the chef in Ukraine who's just cooking for 1,000 people all of a sudden, whose whole life has changed, you know. We can make a difference, and we can combat in lots of ways, even among our young people who are kind of lost as to what to do with all this, and they're detached from church and from all these issues.
I believe that sometimes after a very difficult crisis, like after the World War II, people turn to God because they realize that God is more powerful than any pandemic and any war, and I believe that.
I agree.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I was just watching, trying to get YouTube on Sunday, but I started watching, and there are so many. The Chosen has brought so many young people all over. People are talking about it. The characters are young. The whole thing is young. And I think this is a surge that we might be seeing more of this. Young people, not necessarily the church, inside the building, but they're turning to something.
I agree. We need to stop here as we kind of wind up. But I also think in the context of what's going to happen on Friday, Friday is Good Friday, the ultimate action by the living God for humanity, for the human condition. And if there's a way that we can, like you say, in the Chosen and other ways, to convey that message. And then, of course, Easter morning. And what that means for all of us,
Right.
for those in the midst of war, for those who are ill, those who, you know, have COVID, all the rest of it. There's hope.
Yeah. Well, I feel that Jesus died in the cross for our sins, but he also died nowadays for the people that are losing their wives, their husbands, their children. They're also for the elderly that are left alone to die alone, for the people, even for the soldiers that are out there having to kill their brothers and sisters because of peace in the world and peace in their countries.
Well, that reminds me of I've mentioned it before, the Eisenstadt triptych on the altar in Germany, where Jesus has the plague, and he's covered in spots from the plague because he so identifies with us that he's entered the human experience, and out of that can come change.
And our Friday service is a special service from 12 to 3. It's a come-as-you-are type service. You don't have to stay for the whole thing. It's the 7 last words of Christ. It's a very meaningful depiction of what our lives will be after death to this resurrected life on Sunday. We should take those 3 hours, no matter where we're at, and recognize that it is special for us to recognize the 4 letters that are on that cross. It's not just the INRI that is on all the paintings, but what's up there is love, L-O-V-E. If he can love with his last blood into water, if he can give that much life as the Creator's Son, what can he do for us? What are we supposed to do? Take time during those 3 hours. If you can't come here, try to be quiet for a while. Try to pick up part of the New Testament. Just read a couple lines. Be with us here wherever you are between 12 and 3 this Friday.
Thank you very much, Ray. And
I
thank
think,
you, Adela.
yeah, and I think meditation is so important.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
I appreciate all of you being. God
Thank
bless
you.
all of you.
God bless you.